like when you go to prison, you think of freedom. When you live in a war, I think it's inevitable not to think of whatever comes after it, a better day. So I always think, because in Lebanon there's this movement that accuses or criticizes artists of having too much capitalized on the war as a subject, too much worked on it. And maybe later I'll ask you the same questions, like as a scholar and as a researcher, as someone who's interested in questioning documents and doing actually a field work about photographic documents. Is there a space to do something else, maybe outside it? I ask myself the question, and I try always to escape being hijacked into a particular position according to people's expectations or political expectations from me. Anyway, I'm known for many of being one of the key players in an organization that was created in Beirut, the Arab Image Foundation, and very innocently thought in 1997 that it could collect images and constitute an archive for the future. A country where public institutions thought of archiving, many artists thought that they could displace that objective into a cultural form and make an institution that works at the same time for the preservation and for promoting issues of preservation, and at the same time creating a platform for artists to generate collections, to work on different topics in field works that would generate an archive that is a shared one and not an exclusively used by those artists. So that is 13 years ago, and today I really see a lot of limits in that project, although I'd never regret it, and I think it's really great that the Arab Image Foundation still exists and still is able to act as such platform. I'm starting with this image, which is actually a short video, because with time I realized that what draws me is not only individual images. For long I worked on trying to use images as texts, cultural texts, trying to analyze them, try to look particularly at the modern period, how photographs served to propagate issues related to modern times. Not necessarily modernity, but it was a vehicle to promote some kind of a lifestyle that people wanted to be part of. And with time, I was more and more interested in not in the pictures themselves, not in looking at pictures as texts, but to the practices that created those pictures. I mean, notably studio practices, notably practices outdoors, but relate to studio practices as well, like itinerant photographers and photo surprise, and how much trying to look at how much they resembled other existing photographic forms like documentary photography. And with time, I realized that actually what interests me is this. It's like something that is really opaque, that doesn't tell you anything, but allows you to build upon. It allows you to start from an opaque image that tells you nothing, and then later try to tell stories, narratives. It's exactly like what interests me in this. These are metallic boxes that used to house bulk films. Inside them, this photographer, Hashim al-Madani, kept his 35mm rolls. So when you encounter, as an archaeologist, and I'm going to borrow this term from our hosts, as an archaeologist, when I go to that site looking for images, my first encounter with them is this. Before I encounter something like that. And it's the journey between this and that that constitutes my work. I have been collecting many stories related to the constraints of producing photographs in particularly my social context. A very known image is this one because it's a very particular instance when Madani, the photographer, had to scratch the negative of that carried the portrait of this woman because her husband came to him a few weeks ago later, claiming that this picture was taken without his permission. And it's that moment that I was interested in after having worked on images as texts, because it brought me to the practice. It brought me back to practicing photography in a society where photography is not easily accepted. And that brought me to look for how the photographer worked, which tools he worked, and I really, it helped me consider this this place, this studio, as a site for an ongoing excavation where not only images are important, but whatever exists outside them. The tools, the cameras, the photographer himself, and from there on, I think the issue of preservation is not about preserving only emulsion, is not only preserving pictures and negative, but it's preserving the set of objects that existed around them, including the photographer. Machines. And I started working on different display, like different ways to display that excavation, including working all the machines, like trying to display all the machines that that the photographer had, machines in every vitrine, recorders, and later Super 8s, projectors, tools, and everything. It's like, as someone who's leading this excavation, I could no longer permit myself to isolate pictures from whatever comes around them. I'm going to cut this short because I want to reach somewhere where we could find like a platform to talk about images of Israelis and Palestinians and what could be done across the border. And I'm bringing these three images into the discussion. These images I collected from Jordan, from Palestinian families in Jordan. This is a picture that was taken by Hisham Abdelhadi in Jericho somewhere in the early 60s. And it has family members, his wife, his future wife, and then two of her relatives. I also collected these pictures from Jaffa, from a woman who is descendant from the Rock family, which is a French-German family who settled in Palestine for long, and then who was displaced with her family to Jordan. And this is a masquerade party that they held at home to commemorate Easter in 1933. So they used to do thematic parties, and that theme here was Commedia dell'arte. And this is a very specific picture because I collected it from someone named Samiye Khairi, who comes from the Taji family in Ramle, and who did not have pictures. She really had very, very few pictures, but she could give me this one of the house where she grew up and that her father built. And she told me that today this is a mental hospital, a mental asylum. Today this is, I think, it's near Tel Aviv. I'll tell you later what this is. So, just a second. Last year I did a piece that is called on photography, people and modern times, and I used all this research that I did in 1998, 1999, with the objective of bringing all these images to the Arab Image Foundation, constituting this archive, and throughout my work, I wanted to bring this duality in the contexts in which photographs exist today versus the context in which they have always lived. And I think much of this comes from the fact that once in an institution, photographs are go through certain standards for preservation, which makes them a little bit inaccessible, or at least not easily touched the way they were when they lived with their families. And in 1998, 1999, I always documented in video the families from which I took photographs. So I wanted to bring together in one screen those two contexts. And I did this piece 30 minutes long. Shall I? I did this. Okay. Okay. Sorry. I did this piece that is 40 minutes long. Here I'll show you an excerpt from it. I selected the three characters or the three collections that talk about Palestine. Can we switch to the sound? Do you hear the sound of the video? She is the granddaughter of Garabet Krikorian and the daughter of Johannes Krikorian, who is a famous photographer from Jerusalem, but she lives in Amman. She lived back then in Amman.
Gesture or word expressed يعني خسارة في الشولات. Never. I appreciated this very much. It was very, very nice. وبعدين أنا
Is the sound connected or no?
بس ما كثير كانت تحكي لي عليه. She left him very much at father-in-law.
Did you go to your father's studio?
أيوة, I went often. كنت ألعب, كان عنده هيك جوي basket full of خراخيش, you know, the bracelets and the rings. الفلاحات هدول كانوا يلبسوهم ويتصوروا فيهم. I used to play with the jewelry. It was very thrilling for me.
So as you see, this is an interview that was made in 1998, and my interest in it was to trying to capture people's relationship to their pictures before the moment of departure, because since then they departed from their pictures became part of the archive of the Arab Image Foundation, and they received reproductions, modern reproductions of those pictures. Maybe, do we have a sound jack to go here? Any idea? No?
And for a time he used the projectors, كهرباء. بس بعدين هذا it was towards the end.
Or yeah, just completely escaped my mind that we had to put an audio jack to get the sound from here. Anyway, now we're moving to the second one. That's Hisham Abdelhadi, who also lives today in Amman, talking about his pictures. So here on the right hand, you see him putting the reproductions that we did for him into the album that contained other pictures. Super. Yeah, can you check? Now you should have the sound there. Yeah. Thanks.
الصورة كانت عندما اشتريت أول سيارة BMW كانت 1.5 يعني 1.5 لتر، وذهبت بها إلى أريحة. وفي الصورة تظهر بعد الأقارب خطيبتي مع ابنة الدكتور خليل بديري بنت أختي يعني بتكون، وبنت سعيد باشا المفتي. يعني كانت ذكريات قديمة جدا أصبحت سنين تركض يعني.
أنت اقترحت عليهم يعملوا على السيارة دي؟
Most of the photographs that I remember I collected in this period did not show war. Actually, it was moments of. I think it's because they are family pictures, basically, and not pictures that were neither taken by journalists or by the state.
سمعتها من الطابق الثاني، نزلت لتحت تقول لها ايش ليش شو قصتها هاي الست؟ مرت السفير القنصل الفرنساوي. لما سمعتها اجت حكيت انا وياها، قلت لها انا يعني بس بدي اقول لك انه انا خلقت بهذا البيت وحابه اتفرج. بظهر هي عندها فكره عن تاريخ المنطقه، فعرفت انه البيت هذا. لما قلت لها انا امي مدام بنت روك عرفت، لانه طبعا كثير اشياء لسه موجوده اساميهم على الاغراض الكتب اللي هاي، فشي واز سمباثيك يعني immediately قالت تفضلي ايش بتحبي اعمل لك، وهالقد كانت لطيفه، بدها تحمل لي الاغراض في البيت رجائي، حمل لي الاغراض. الآن بالمسكية هم كانت يعني هم كانوا شوية أهل أمي أفانغارد بالنسبة للمجتمع تبعهم، لأنه دارسين بفرنسا وستي فرنسوية يعني كانوا يعملوا هيك حفلات حتى يتسلوا فيها. كان عندهم هذا الصالون التحتاني، الصالون الشرقي.
So when I did this piece, I was thinking of really like
فكانوا يعملوا دائما فيه حفلات
an essential
عشان يتسلوا، يعملوا كل سنة بالمسكة وقت العيد.
an essential strategy that governed always my practice with pictures is like the idea of displacement. It was very, very important for me to take pictures outside their context in order to be able to build on them, make them function differently in another context. And here I'm going to show you very quickly Samia Khairi because quickly I want to move on.
ما قبلت ابدا. اما لما راح ابني عم نور بالصفيه اخذ اولاده قلت له
Because these families have Jordanian passports, they were able after the middle of 90s to go back and visit their homes.
كيف تيجي؟ قال لهم شو بيت سيدي ابو ماما. بعدين اجى واحد ضابط اللي هو بقول له احنا متاسفين هذول بس مش فهمانين، وانت ما تزعل يا اخي، تعال تفضلوا. اخذوهم وفرجوهم على البيت. بقول لي ماما يعني البيت بسم البدن، بعرفه هو بتذكر انه طلع هو عمره 7 سنين من البلد، بيعرف دار سيده. قال لي ماما البيت بسم البدن لانه كله كتابات يهوديه وصور يهوديه وعبرانيه، مع انه حاطين صوره الوالد وحاطين هيك انه يعني هذا كان. وانت حفيده للبيك، انت حفيده للبيك. قول لهم انا.
So from there on, I mean, after I did this work, I really remembered how she was like attached to the house in which she lived. So I really did some research first on the internet and then with friends, and found that some people have uploaded pictures of her father and the house today, which looks like this, on a website. And what's interesting about this picture in particular is that the picture is in color, so it's taken today after the house was not anymore their property. Yet you see her father and his friends standing on the stairs. And one of the pictures, that this one is like makes it very clear that there's a collage that actually people took an image from here and then put it here. And in this website, you find a lot of pictures that are taken when this family still lived in that house. And that's the archives today. And this is what I found on the net. This is like Nessiona. Yes, thank you, Nessiona. So I asked my friend Avi Moghrabi, the Israeli filmmaker, to look for it, and this is like in the context of an ongoing collaboration that we started at the Laboratoire d'Aubervilliers last year, where we did a kind of performance in which we brought each his pictures, and we kind of tried to unmake the existing nations, unmake the borders between nations, and start to ask questions like, who is the Israeli and who is the Arab? Like very, very innocent questions. And this comes from our belief that I don't think one can look at those documents coming from that conflict by obeying the current national ideological construct. I really think one needs to transgress it a little bit, maybe. And he sent me a few weeks ago this. This is in our collaboration. This is his 5th mission, because I've always kept on giving him different missions to do in Israel. And because we're running out of time, I will, I think, comment on the images by paragraphs from Iri Trogov. So what you see here is like him going into that place.
שלום, אני רוצה לבקר פה בבניין הזה הגדול של בית החולים.
Here he's talking to a guard, asking for permission to film and bringing up the fact that this is a house that used to belong to Palestinians, and later he will explain. I don't know if I'm really simultaneously like translating, but he's asking about also bringing up the issue of the law for the protection of the lands or property of the enemy of Israel. Also,
תשמע, עיקרון, אתה יכול להסתכל לי בחוץ, אבל אין לי אפשרות להביא לך להיכנס פנימה.
בסדר,
זה הנה על האוכל וזה,
I'm going to skip very quickly because we lack time. So the camera is taken from him and is put somewhere here. And then I was letting Samia Khairi talk about her house.
فلسطين أول شيء يقول له بدي أخذك تروح على الجنة.
How much like she remembers it as paradise. And then well, Iri Trogov talks about transcending current conditions and locations around one. And she says perhaps one of the ways of doing so is turn the computer sound. Yes. Perhaps one of the ways of doing so, of transcending the conditions and location, is by an understanding that geography is not location, but a situated knowledge. Who we are, where we are, what we know, what our heritages and allegiances are, has always been linked to the geography, not as a set of locating vectors, but rather to yoke places, to traditions and trajectoires of knowledge. Each place knows differently, and if they are not to be related to one another in dated and irrelevant notions of knowledge from the center versus knowledge from the periphery, then how might they produce circular movements of knowledge, which defies geographical subjugation? The concept of exhausted geographies that I'm trying to discuss, again, Iri Trogov here, is a concept that is trying to work against the grain of both the boundaries of the possible and of location as a site of identity and knowledge. And she later says, and so I have been thinking of exhaustion in relationship to political conflicts, not a mode of opting out and withdrawing, but as one of recognizing the limits of a logic that has dominated that conflict for most of its duration. I suspect that this will take the form of an act of treason, in Deleuze's sense of treachery, a refusal to support and sustain that which demands it of you because it claims to support and sustain you. For in the realm of living out long-term political conflict, treason and exhaustion are not unrelated to one another. Yeah, and I'm gonna finish this short clip just by because I think
وياخذوا الشاي يقولوا لنا فيش بعد هيك هذا احنا دائما بنوال احنا علينا نوصلكم بصيرش الوالد يجي ياخذكم
So on the left, the house as her family photographed later in the 90s when they were able to go to Israel. And Awry was trying to get around it because he was not given permission back then to go and film inside. Edith Rogoff at one point also says, at these moments of political exhaustion, we might actually exit a mode that seeks resolution to conflict and enter another temporality, that which is one of inhabitation. Yeah, and I finished this. I thought it was too short. I thought it was... Yeah. Thanks. Sorry for a moment.
Okay. Does anybody have questions to the?
Thank you very much for this exciting, extraordinary presentation. And I have a question to ask of Ariella. Well, you showed these pictures, and of course it's not obvious to a viewer, a spectator who doesn't know the history as well as you do, what is shown in the picture. So don't you think that this potential history or alternative history should be supported by a very powerful discursive, how should I say, element? That is to say, the image calls for a caption. You know, again, the Benjaminian dictum. So what about the caption?
Thank you. The two archives are, each of the photograph in these archives was accompanied by a very large caption. And when I'm saying very large, I'm speaking in terms of the first archive is composed of 730 images, and all 730 images add at least 200 or 300 words of caption. This is why the book was published only until today in Hebrew and Italian. It was never published in English because no publisher was in English wanted to publish such a huge amount of images and text. And the other archive also, it was published with captions. So it is not only captions, it is a whole historical research. It is my understanding that photography was ignored by historians for many, many years. For example, there was a huge debate in Israel among historians. Did the Palestinians fled the country or expelled? And for years they disputed it. And when you look at the images, you see the organization of the expulsion. You see the buses supplied by the army. You see the way that everything was administered. The Palestinians were aligned in lines along the roads. I mean, you can reconstruct the modus operandi of the expulsion, which cannot be represented anymore as Palestinian fleeing the country. So there is a very huge historical research behind this. And in the last few years, I find myself beside my hat of a political philosopher and of visual culture specialist, also becoming an historian, because you cannot deal with photograph unless if you are exploring history. And part of exploring history is, of course, the materiality that Akram presented, I think. And I would like also to continue the question to you, Akram. What are the forms of the archive that you created? This was wonderful to see the way that you are working as an artist with all these materials, but what are the various forms of the archive, if you can tell us more about it, of the entire archive?
The forms, the different documents or objects. Oh, I did a lot of publications. I did 5 or 6 publications and many exhibitions. Using particularly, I didn't expand on the idea of displacement. I think it's very, very important to displace images from photographic medium. Documents in general. Written documents has to be displaced into another media and said differently, because I think you, like particularly photography today, with the history of photography, photography is a medium, photography is an art, it carries a background. So when you take an image, frame it and put it on a wall, it says something that is so different from when you take a shot of it in video and include it in a body of a video work. So displacement is that also for me. It's like it's not only the function of the photograph, but also I think I like to, well, I did a lot of videos that relate to photographic documents and publications, and I think the theater of the living is the best form that these pictures could inhabit in all, like with time and space, and like the Madani project, for example, is really like an ongoing project where the photographer is still alive, the studio is still opened, so it's like an intervention that is open-ended, because there keeps on. There are situations that come up sometimes only because the photographer is still alive, in relationship to the pictures. So the pictures or the documents are not fixed they don't have a fixed definition. They change with time. Whenever you do a work about them, they change. So, yeah.
So, would you like? So this is the last question, and to jest ostatnie pytanie i później jeszcze, gdyby Państwo chcieli do czegoś wrócić, będzie jeszcze można to zrobić na dyskusji zamykającej całą konferencję.
Just a very short question to Akram Zaatari. Was it or what was your intention? Your first projection was an image of the archival shelves, but you didn't show us a photography of the archive, but a movie of the archival shelves which didn't move themselves, but time was passing in the film. Was it by intention that you showed a still as a movie of the archive?
I mean, I'm fascinated with stillness and movement, and I think it's, it's not a coincidence, but I can't explain it much yet, because this is a work that is in progress. But much of my work in reenacting pictures is actually asking people to pose in a certain position, imitating a picture, but videotape them in movement. So I like this, and also this is why, for example, on Photography, People and Modern Times is a video that is made with still pictures. So when you see the archivist manipulating pictures, putting them on the table, these are still pictures and that are edited in a video. Thanks. Thank you, Awry.